So in the next video, what I'm going to introduce is some of the basic concepts and general description for the metrics. In these slides, you can looking at some of the basic project control terms where, if you recall, in the scope chapter, we actually talked about using WBS to capture 100% of the scope of the project, and then we're using WBS dictionary to supplement the supplements to WBS so that we can have much more detailed information captured through the dictionary. And for the worker package status, and if we see work WBS as a hierarchical breakdown structure, if you know the work package status, if you roll them up, then you probably knows how your project's working, and then you can actually benchmark with the original plan that you set up in the planning phases of project management. And if you want to identify who's doing the work, you can actually go into your organizational breakdown structure, and which is connected to the WBS. To identify or to measure your performance, and or to know how much you have accomplished, you have to actually come up with the measurement in order to quantitatively measure your accomplishment. Remember the 90% symptom or syndrome we talked about before, where if you ask people how much work they have been completing up to this point, excuse me, and a lot of them will say, well, I have been done 90% of the work. And 2 weeks later, if you ask them the same question, they're going to reply back to you, yes, we have done 90%. We only have 10% left. If you do not have a solid quantitative measurements, then it's difficult for you to actually capture how much you have accomplished. All right. Okay. To compare the actual resource consumption and our actual plan, this is what we call as in the next bullet point as a baseline. We will need to actually establish the baseline based on planning, which means once we finish a plan and we feel okay, and then we get approval, and then we're going to freeze it, that becomes our baseline. And what you're trying to do in the next phases of your project execution phases, you start to do the work and you benchmark how much work you have been done against your baseline. So if you follow the baseline, it means you actually are on the right track. If you falling behind the baseline, or actually your cost exceeds your baseline cost, and then there's the problems over there. That's how you evaluate the project performance. And then the risk definition and evaluation, we will talk about the risk in probably week 10 or week 11. And we will talk about how we're going to define risk factors in project management, how we set up a risk register, and how we're going to evaluate risk throughout the project. And lastly, dealing with the scope change management. Remember the pictures we showed in the class where initially you just think about design a small boat, and eventually through over the time, when you have the 2% scope increase each month, by the end of 2 years, and then all of a sudden you have a large huge boat which looks fancy, but actually it's way exceeds your original design of your project. All right. In order to manage our scope change, we will need to have an ICC, which stands for Integrated Change Control Process. Whenever there is a scope change request, and you will have to strictly follow the ICC process to make sure that all the impacts associated with the scope change are evaluated, are assessed, and all the scope change are approved, and all the changes are documented, and your plans are adjusted based on approved change. So that is a formal process, and we call it the integrated change control. All right. Looking at what management is interested to know, they are interested to know what is the status, how much progress I'm making, and if there's a problems, figure out what is the root cause and try to fix those problems by looking at the root causes, and then knows where it's going to be 6 months down the road or 2 years, 5 years down the road. And also they want to know whether you actually address the stakeholders' expectations, right? So that's all the important things that management want to know. If we as a project manager actually can handle all these 5 bullet points over here, then you will make your manager happy. Okay, so how are we going to actually connect all those metrics over to management goals? Each metrics that we propose in project management will have to relate to a specific management areas of interest in a direct way. Okay, which means you gotta have a reason why you need to using these metrics. All right, you need to justify, not just because you want to use them, but it's because there is a specific management area of interest that you're trying to address. So if you do not, which is the next bullet point, then the next likely you are going to collect some information that is the right thing, right? Okay. There's another quote based on IDC, which is an independent research company who has done a lot of research studies. This is for the business intelligence study back in I think middle 2000. Well, what they found was 75% of organizations that rate themselves as the most competitive in this industry use a formal performance management methodology. And compared with the other half, which is the least competitive organizations, and the percentage value actually drops from 75% over to 43%, right? So that actually tells you that in order to be successful or to be competitive, companies or organizations should use a formal performance management methodology, which means they need to come up with a good metrics, and they need to use the metrics to measure the performance, and they also need to use the metrics to address management concerns and to address stakeholders' concerns to improve the quality, cost, scope, and schedule. I'm going to move at a faster rate for the following slides, because I think what I'm trying to do with this video recording of the lectures is actually just provide you with the insights, or provide with you the most important information that you need to take away. But there will be much more reading that you need to do by yourself, all right? And not just for the lecture notes by themselves, but also for the assigned textbook chapters, as well as the reading materials that are uploaded on the Blackboard. All right, so KPI categories and performance management. One of the most important things that you should know that we do have a lot of KPI indicators that you can actually use to measure its performance, and it can be categorized into schedule progress, resource and cost, product size and stability, product quality, process performance, technology effectiveness, and customer satisfaction, right? So on the right hand side you can actually see a list of different specific indicators you can use to capture all these 7 categories. Okay. Contemporary KPIs, and this will be some of the KPI we have been talking about most recently. Earned value parameters will be one of the most important thing for this class, and I think I started talking about earned value from the first class. All right, and because this is a very important concept and it's very useful, very powerful. However, it did not get the attention it deserves in the practice, which means still a lot of companies struggled with how it's supposed to work and how to implement earned value. And if you come out of this class actually really understand what earned value is and how to implement it, you can make a huge contribution to your future employers. All right. And then quantitative forecasts, and this is also very important from management perspective. We want to know what the schedule and cost will look like 6 months down the road, 1 year, 2 years down the road, right? And the risk status and risk control, risk management is also one of the very popular topics for now. How we define the reserve, how we going to compare with the baseline, and what are some of the most important risk factors that based on our ranking, rating systems. Reserves evaluations, we talked about buffer, and we're saying that in general practice is actually we should set a buffer which is equivalent to 50% of our project duration. But that will change from industry to industry, right? And you will have to evaluate what is the most effective buffer size you need to incorporate in your project planning. Change control, and actually we have 2% increase in our scope. We call it the scope creep, and how that will affect our project management. Of course, it matters a lot. Then how we're going to deal with that. All right. And last one, technical performance rating. Okay. Again, we have some more detailed metrics examples: earn value, cost performance index, schedule performance index, staffing, which is turnover ratio, and staffing percentage utilization, scheduling issues, dealing with the critical path, the buffer, requirements management, change control, peer reviewed items, defect maturity, and the fixed rate. So that's all pretty much some of the important metrics that we have been using in the industry. And of course, we're not saying that all of those metrics has to have the equal weight, which means depends on the nature of the project. Sometimes if you're more cost driven, or you're more schedule driven, or actually if change control matters more, then you actually really need to prioritize the list of metrics a little bit in such a way that you know what is important to you and what metrics needs to come into the first place. And sometimes there might be conflicts. For instance, if you're going to dealing with the change control, and how is such a process will have impact on the buffer, on the cost performance index, schedule performance index. So it will be more like a learning curves for you to actually understand what metrics is and how to deal with different metrics in a working setting. Because when there's a conflict, then you have to deal with conflicts. You have to evaluate how such a conflict will have impact on your project holistically. Next two slides actually show you a little bit more about how we match up management goals with different metrics and some of the KPI categories. I'm not going to spend too much time on there, but in the next 3 slides, actually of 4 slides, we have some different snapshots coming from the Department of Energy. I think this will be a very important actual concepts for you to take away, because Department of Energy is one of the government agency that has one of the very rigorous project management practice in place. All right, so a lot of things you can take away from this 4 slides. Type of performance measures, right? And if you're looking at, we have the process-oriented, project-oriented, and the products-oriented. I hope you still remember the difference, or the which one is above what. Okay, type of discussion we had before. But if you use a process, then the performance measures leads to looking at how we can increase the capability, how we can do more with less, how we can improve the quality. If it's a project metrics, it's the same way as we talked about in the class, how to track project progress, how to assess your status, and of course there's another from procurement perspective, how we're going to award contract fees. If it's coming from products metrics, then how we're going to define or determine product quality, how we identify the defect rates, and how we define defects, and how we can ensure the product's performance. Then the next slide is talking about the typical metrics categories, where we have the schedule, budget, and functionality. And if you're looking at on the right hand side of this slide, actually you can see is a not of actual versus a planned. This is where the baseline coming into play in this metrics, right? So we baseline our schedule, we baseline our budget for our resources, and then that is what we call the planned. And based on that, we keep tracking of our actual schedule, our actual budget, and we compare those two, actual versus plan. That is how you establish your project performance evaluation metrics, right? Okay. Some of the simple summary of project metrics groupings. If you look at the categories for the schedule performance, okay, and the focus might be at different aspects, right? For instance, the first focus might be the task completed versus task planned at the point of time. The purpose for this focus is for us to assess project progress, okay? And then the measure of success will be 100% completion of tasks on critical paths or 90% on all others. Then if the next focus switch over to change to customer requirements, and then we actually need to define the purpose for this one is how we're going to understand and manage our scope and schedule because of change to customer requirements, right? And so the measure of success in this case is we need to have all changes managed through approved change process. This is why we're saying that we need to have ICC, which is integrated change control process, in the right place in such a way that we can actually address the change to our scope because of a customer requirements changes. All right. In this slide, it shows us an example project scorecard. When we are evaluating project performance, remember we talked about we probably can end up with a number of different metrics, and then how we're going to use all those different metrics, how we're going to prioritize those different metrics, that will be determined on a case-by-case scenario. Look at this one. We have 9 different WBS components in this project, and for each component we actually have SPI, schedule performance index, CPI, cost performance index, technical performance, and quality, right? And for each of those WBS components we have a rating for each of those categories, and then how we're going to evaluate those. You can see that, well, of course, the performance index, SPI and the CPI, the larger the better. Definitely, you can see that it looks like A has a very good, very solid schedule and cost performance, okay, compared with plan. Of course, you can see it's on average, right? Is 1.1, 1.1, and of course it also have a super performance in the technical performance and the quality, okay, and then that is number 1, and then number 2 you go to B, and you go to C, and you finish at I, and you come up with all the measurements for those 4 different categories. And then when you're ranking them, you need to choose first one. What is most important? Are we more looking at SPI, CPI, or quality or technical performance, right? So that is pretty much how we actually apply this example project scorecard when we try to manage project from metrics standpoint of